Hi, thanks Christina, and thanks everyone for coming. So like she said, I'm going to talk about domain administration for the Office 365 domains we host on our system, and then I'm going to dive a little bit into the API that we provide to help administrators administer their users and their domains and resources and whatnot. So for some background, we currently host hundreds of domains. I think the number is somewhere over 300 at this point. And in all those domains, we have over 100,000 objects. That includes net IDs and service accounts and resources, domains, amongst other things. Then you're probably familiar with the WISC account administration site, which the header is displayed there. It's what we have provided in the past for domain administrators to administer their domains and their users. So that has grown organically over the years, so we can delegate administrative access to you all who administer domains. And over the process of many years, we've grown a bunch of different administrative access levels that all have varying capabilities to interact with the objects in these domains and all the net IDs. Some examples of these are like system admins, which would be the team of us that administers the actual system. Domain administrators, which I assume many of you are, most of you are. Of course, there's like security that needs to perform security-related actions, the help desk that does things to aid in troubleshooting, account-related problems, and just basically general information. So there's a lot of different administrative levels that we've grown, like I said, grown organically over the course of many years. And then there are a variety of different object types that we allow our users to administer, including regular Office 365 domains, domains that are completely hosted in Office 365, domains that are still transitioning from external systems to Office 365. And then there's service accounts, resources like rooms and equipment that can be reserved, and then net ID accounts, which all of us have. And all the access to modify, view, update these objects is controlled by a nuanced permissioning system we've built. And the access level that you're granted is based on, of course, who you're authenticated to our applications as and what type of object you're attempting to administer. So the authenticated user has membership to a variety of groups. These groups administer the domains or administer users and give you access to individual objects based on your affiliations. So your ability to call a specific method on a user or a domain or a resource is based on who you're authenticated as and the groups you're a member of. Any questions about some general background? So to extend on the WISC account administration site, which is just a GUI that has its faults but has worked well in the past, we recently started offering the domain admin API, which is what we're here talking about today. And so I'll give a general definition of an API, which I think is pulled off of Wikipedia or something. It's an application program interface. It's a set of routines, protocols, and tools for building software applications. And so we allow you to use this to administer your Office 365 domains and users programmatically rather than going in through the GUI that we've built. It is the same framework that we're using, the same web services framework that we're using in the WISC account admin site. So the methods that are available to you in the domain admin API is a parody of what we have in the domain admin API. So for the most part, all functionality is mirrored, and it's controlled by the same authorization and access restrictions. And of course, it gives you regular CRUD operations for your domain and users, allowing you to create new users, update existing users, or whatever needs to be done. Whatever you could do in the admin site, you could do with the domain admin API. So, I mean, there's some obvious benefits to using an API over the GUI. It'll allow you to do things programmatically, of course. So if you have routine tasks you need to automate, for instance, if you frequently assign alternate addresses to new users you have, like new students or new hires in your department or whatever, rather than going into the admin GUI and entering an address, selecting the user you want it to be on, you could do it programmatically, which is also especially helpful if you have a lot of bulk operations, like if you're creating 100 accounts every semester or something like that. You could rather than creating an account one after another, you can do it programmatically to streamline that. Another big advantage I can imagine for departments is, I know a lot of you have existing systems that provision accounts for users when they're hired or students. If you want to hook into that existing provisioning infrastructure to create accounts or create alternate addresses for users as they join your department, this would be the ideal way to do that, since you can just add to the code that you have already existing and do whatever you need to do for the user from the perspective of your Office 365 domain. So a little background on how it works and how you would get set up starting from scratch, really. So you would request credentials from our team. The credentials that we would provide are unique to your department. They are sort of de facto members of groups at your domain that are administered by your domain. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. The groups that administer your domains, they are a member of those groups, so they have the same permissions as the users that are members of that groups. When you call our web services, you're challenged with an HTTP basic authentication. You use those credentials to authenticate, which identifies you to us as, or identifies the authenticated user to us as a member of the groups that your account is supposed to be able to administer. So it'll have access to any users and accounts that are defined when we create the account. And of course, the access to methods and modifying users is controlled in the same tight way as the WSC account admin site. And it's all done on the back end, so there's no risk of visibility of information across domains that shouldn't be visible, or updating or deleting things that you shouldn't have access to. Any questions? Diving in a little bit to the methods, of course, there's your basic getter and setter methods, things to get information about users, get information about resources, update users, change information about resources, get the list of users in your domain. Most of that is pretty fundamental and needs very little explanation. Things that you need to be able to see about your users are all available to you. The full list of these things is visible. The methods that are visible to the API are in the admin site at that page under domain administration, the domain admin API. It's got the list of actions that are available to you, what parameters are required, if they're optional, what you should expect for returns from those methods. So if you need to see the full list, that's where you should look for that. And then I have what I refer to as like helper utility methods. These methods exist just to help you navigate the API. They don't really provide anything functional. It's allowing you to get more information about the API. And the three I want to mention right now are GetContext allowed methods, GetAdministered objects, and search objects. I'm going to dive into each of those a little bit in the next few slides here. So the first one is for getting the methods that are available to you to call based on the context that you provide. The method name is GetContextAllowed methods. And when you call this, it will return a list of methods that are available for you to call based on a context you provide. And it's very flexible with how you can identify the context. So one of the parameters you pass it is context. And if you want to see what you can call on like a domain, for instance, you would pass the context mydomain.wisc.edu. Or a user, you could identify a user by a net ID or a service account by email address. And it's very flexible, so you can give it an email address of the service account, or you can give it the unique identifier. So I give some example context on there, like I just talked about. So again, when you call this, it will return to you just an array of methods that are available to call on that context. So if you call it on a service account, for instance, it'll tell you can get the information about the service account, you can edit the service account, it'll give you those method names so you can have a better idea of what's available. Next helper method is for getting a list of objects that you are authorized to administer based on the authenticated credential. This one's name is GetAdministered objects. This will return key value pairs. It'll give you a list of domains, resources, and users that you're authorized to administer. And each of those will be a list of users with some basic a list of objects with some basic information about each of them. I think for service accounts, we give back like the user principal name, the email addresses. I can't recall specifically, but we give you some basic information to help you identify it. It'll also inform you what domains you can administer with the authenticated credentials. So if you're an administrator of multiple domains and this credential has access to administer these domains, that list will be provided there. And one important note is that the service accounts and resources within a domain are excluded from the list that's returned here because those are assumed. It's assumed that if they're within your domain, they're administrable. And since some domains have thousands of objects, rather than having a very verbose response, we strip out the things that are just assumed, the service accounts within the domain. And the last method is for searching for administered object, and this is useful if you don't know exactly what you're looking to administer, but you have a general idea of it. Like for instance, if you have, say, a service desk that has a service account, and you're not sure what Are we back online now?
Yes.
Okay. Where did we get lost?
Slide right
Okay. So to recap, yes, we can up the limit if you feel that it's necessary and too restrictive at 25. Just let me know. I'll give a contact email address later in the slide. Any other questions? All right, so this is a brief demo. This demo is using a client called Advanced REST Client. It's a Chrome extension that you can use to call REST APIs. Pretty simple. The screenshots are rather self-explanatory, which is why I'm using it for the demo here. So in this first example, we're going to do a simple just get context allowed methods, like one of those helper methods that we mentioned. And in this particular example, so we identify the endpoint as whiskmail.whisk.edu/domainadmin.json. That's our domain admin API endpoint. And then the method we want to call, we have to pass as the action parameter. Method name is GetContextAllowedMethods. Yes.
One of our remote users is wondering if you can speak up a little bit.
Sure, we'll try to speak up.
Okay.
I don't know if, so I'm going to submit this request in the next screenshot. We are going to be challenged with the HTTP basic auth. I provide the credentials there. Once that succeeds, we get a response from the web service giving us a list of methods that are available based on the context. And because the context in that screenshot was null, there was no context, the methods that will be returned are based on no context. So the methods you can call are very limited. You can basically call the helper methods. And then there's some that are not really pertinent to non-transitioning domains. But so this next example is a little more advanced. And this is one where we're editing a service account that already exists. So that method is edit MSOL user. And so again, the method name is the action parameter. And we have to identify the service account we want to modify with MSOL UID, which is the Microsoft Online Unique ID. You hopefully are at least passingly familiar with that. It's left-hand side _ domain without the whisk.edu. So in this case, we want to edit the first name, the last name, and the description. And so we can exclude any of those three parameters with this call, but by providing all three, it's going to attempt to edit any of those three that change. So by submitting this request, we're going to change the service account's first name to example, the last name to account, and the description, which is just visible to the admin site, to changing the description. So when we submit this edit request, the response we get a 200 HTTP status, which is a success. And then in all of our responses, which I didn't point out in the last one, we give a message, which is just a user-readable message. The person using the API can read it, and in this case, the message is success. In any successful call, we're generally going to give a success message. And then the information you care about for get methods is going to be in result. And then for like an update where it's either you succeeded or you failed, we return for true or success, or we return a 1. For failure, we always return null. So this is going to be just, of course, regular JSON response. And for result on a update, you're going to want to look for a 1 successful true. If there's a failure, it would be null, and we would give a message as to why it failed that hopefully is explanatory as to what went wrong. And I've got one final example. This is an example where we're getting information about users, so you can see a little more complex response. So this method name is getUserInfo. This gets the information about a user that you have access to, and you identify the user that you want to get information about with the MSOL UID again. So this is going to return information about that user. So when we submit this request, you get a successful response. The message again is success, and the result contains key value pairs that has information about the account. One thing that's not clear in this is if this had multiple mail alternate addresses, the mail alternate address response would be a list rather than a string, an array rather than a string. But this is pretty typical of our responses. We'll give you a result. The result has the key value pairs that have the information you are interested in. And again, all of the responses are defined in the documentation from the admin site. Questions? And then this is a bit of code. Hopefully it's at least somewhat readable. It's written in Perl, and it's a very basic client that would call the web service and get information. So I'm just going to quickly walk through it. If you're not familiar with Perl, that's all right. It's pretty self-explanatory what it's doing. In the first 7 lines, it's just grabbing the Perl modules that it's going to need to make this HTTP request. The 9th line is loading the password from some external file that's at secure location domainadmin.pass. So that's the password it's going to ultimately pass to the web service. It's making a new HTTP request to our endpoint, which is whiskmail.whisk.edu/domainadmin.json. And it's providing some post parameters. The action for this particular call is getDomainUsersInfo, which is going to get the list of users in a domain and some basic information about them. We identify the domain. So those are the 2 post parameters we're going to pass. We JSON encode the content, set the content type in this request to application/JSON, JSON data, and then we provide the HTTP basic authorization credentials, so the username and then the password we loaded previously from the file. It's going to make the request and decode the JSON response, and then print the results. So when all this happens, so for instance, these last 2 lines, if this were called DAAPI client.pl, you run that script and you're going to get a JSON response. Again, you're going to see a message. Because this was just print dumper, it's just printing it out to standard out. It's going to give you the JSON response, the message success. It said it read the results from cache, and you get a bunch of results. That's a list of users, and it's truncated just because. So the users would be returned there. Any other questions before I move on? All right. So support for this. If you have any feedback to provide to us or bugs to report, or have any requests for additional or new functionality, or if you want something changed, you can contact the developers of the API at wmplusadmins@doit.whisk.edu. We'll be pretty responsive to that. One thing I want to point out is we don't provide a lot of fundamental API usage support. It's ideally, you should be familiar with calling an API. So that support is going to be rather limited. And just a reminder, as always, to protect your credentials. In this case, your credentials to the domain admin API are capable of deleting all your users or whatever is available to the API. So protect those credentials since they're the keys to your domains. Again, more information, you can find the basic documentation in the Whisk account admin site under domain administration under the domain admin API heading. To request API access credentials, there's a form linked from that same page. fill out that form. We'll get back to you within a day or two via email. And then there's a Domain Admin API users group that several of you are a member of. I'd encourage all of you to join if you're interested. You can start conversations with the group there, get some help there. We're also on that group, so I will respond there if necessary. The email address for that group is there. Otherwise, you can search for groups in Office 365. It's called Domain Admin API Users. You're welcome to join it. And that's all I have. So I'd like to open it up for any other questions, any feedback.